schooler didn't even know how to use a mouse yet. By the end of the year, Espetia said her kids were crying, worried by online learning. Yet, wary of letting her children return to in-person learning, she turned to homeschooling just for the year, just until things got back to normal. The country appears to be on the verge of going back to normal. Her district's schools have been open for months, but Espetia's kids won't be going back to traditional school. Over the past year, she was able to shift her kids' learning schedule outside of the weekday lockstep because her husband works on weekends. She treats Mondays like a weekend. Her kids have less school and everyone can spend more time together as a family. She liked that. She could teach her kids more Mexican history and than they learned in schools. Last year, she joined a Latinos homeschooling Facebook group where families share resources such as Spanish children's books and curriculum ideas. Next school year, she plans to keep teaching her kids herself. Espetia is a part of a wave of parents and caregivers who withdrew their children from U.S. public schools and elected to homeschool because of the pandemic. And she's part of a group that isn't going back. The crisis gave rise to a diverse swath of families that are using tech to totally customize their kids' learning, and they might even change what, quote, going to school means in the post-pandemic world. While homeschooling is legal in all 50 states, it has never been considered the American norm. In 2019, homeschooled students represented just 3.2% of the U.S. students in grades K through 12. Or around 1.7 million students. By comparison, 90% of U.S. students attend public school. But a March 2021 report from the U.S. Census Bureau indicates an uptick in homeschooling during the pandemic. In spring 2020, 5.4% of surveyed households reported homeschooling their children, homeschooling being distinct from remote learning at home through a public or private school. By fall 2020, the figure had doubled to 11.1%. 111 there. The pandemic may also have given rise to a more diverse group of homeschoolers. In 2012, 84% of homeschool families were white. The U.S. Census Bureau surveys indicate that homeschooling rates increased across all ethnic groups in the past year, and the greatest shift was among Black families who reported a 3.3% rate of homeschooling in spring 2020. A little interesting 33 update there, a little signaling to the Black families moving over to homeschooling, and 16.1% later in the fall. Quote, COVID-19 was the publicist for homeschooling, says Khadija Ali Coleman, a longtime homeschooling parent and researcher who studies African-American homeschool students. In April 2020, Ali Coleman and researcher Cheryl Field Smith co-founded the Black Family Homeschool Educators and Scholars Network to connect researchers and the handful of Black homeschooled families they had met through their research. But what began as a small Facebook group climbed to over 1,000 members, including many families new to homeschooling. Families shared a number of forces that drove them away from public and private schools. Some were exhausted by the glitchy mayhem of remote learning. Other BFHES families, Black Families what is BFHES? I think that's, I see. Black Family Homeschool Educators and Scholars Network. Wow. Usually in these articles, if they're trying to acronym something, they'll tell you what the acronym is. Not in this case.
Figure it out.
Yeah. Figure it out yourself, public schooler. Other BFHES families pulled their children from schools after they overheard how teachers spoke to their children, admonishing students who didn't maintain eye contact or keep cameras on. For parents unhappy with COVID-era education, homeschooling could seem like a respite from struggling public and private schools and an opportunity to reclaim a part in their kids' learning. Ali Coleman points out that the pandemic was the catalyst that pushed parents seriously consider what they really wanted for their kids' education, what to look like, the roles they wanted to play as parents, and the options they had outside the default educational institution. This is where online homeschool communities like BFHES comes in. Virtual communities make alternative forms of schooling, like homeschooling and pandemic pods, more accessible for more parents looking outside the neighborhood school. If researching how to start a homeschool is as easy as a Google search, then finding a group of similar-minded families for support and advice is just a few more clicks away. And I'm going to stop there. Again, this article goes on for about 100 more paragraphs of very interesting information about homeschooling and some ideas about it. Now, of course, we have a lot of homeschool people who listen to this show. I don't know why I said of course, but just for your information. And for a lot of different reasons, and not just new homeschoolers, but homeschool veterans that have been doing it forever. And I find it really interesting, Gons, and I want to know what you think, that in the past, homeschool has, it's had sort of a stigma in the secular world. Not saying that we think this or anybody here thinks this, but in the secular world, the homeschoolers don't necessarily have the greatest reputation. Am I wrong?
No, they don't.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of this is for religious reasons, maybe sometimes it's for religious reasons. You don't want your kid going to a secular educational program, which, kind of gets a bad rap for a couple of reasons. But I saw a great meme the other day. Let me tell you about memes, folks. I saw a great meme the other day that basically said, you don't see atheists sending their children to Christian schools because they don't agree with it and they don't want their children brainwashed into Christianity. Why would Christians send their kids to be brainwashed by secular schools? Which makes sense. Look, I was homeschooled. I've been a Christian for my entire life. I was not homeschooled. I went to public school my whole life, and I turned out okay. Not to say that, public school is a complete poisonous atmosphere. But yeah, I fully support the homeschool idea. I had lots of homeschool friends, but they were a unique brood for sure. But I find it really interesting that Wired, of all places, there's this sort of shift in the idea of homeschooling that it's now sort of a social justice issue. They make a big deal about how diverse these homeschooling kids are, which I think is kind of funny because it's like the diversity of people who are not mixing in with people who are different from them. It's incredible. The diversity is great. Coexist, which is sort of I don't know, again, kind of this backward speak type of thing, but it's giving parents are realizing that the public school system is poisonous for a lot of reasons. If not simply for the fact that other adults are sort of put in charge of molding the mind of your child, which can be concerning. And, there's very special reasons why, minorities would want a specific say in what their children are learning, especially with all the attention on colonial mindsets and racism, inherent racism and identity politics and things like that. So there's this interesting shift going on that is favoring homeschool pretty much across the board. I know I just rambled for a while there, Gons, but what are your thoughts?
Well, a couple things come to mind. First off, I think at a certain point, the elite controllers must know that there will be a backlash, correct? So like at a certain point, they know that like a certain segment of the population will be onto them and they're going to break off and do kind of their own thing, or they'll rebel in certain ways. So I'm not surprised there. I'm wondering, though, when it comes to homeschooling, aren't there still standardizations and curriculum that get distributed or sort of managed by a homeschooling organization?
Yeah, so
if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not a pro, but I do believe you're right. There's like an organization that you join. Like you're still sort of you get your curriculums from a company, or there's many companies that provide homeschooling curriculums. I think there's a little bit of wiggle room for parents in that case, but there are support organizations. Whether that's required to join one of those, I'm not sure if it's required or not.
I was going to say, so what, because if you're homeschooled, do you still meet certain local or state or even, federal standards for children? Are there I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked into it enough to know.
So I remember with my homeschool friends, I don't know if it was required or not, but they still took the standardized tests that I took. Remember, you took all those standardized tests, and those are very problematic and useless and dumb anyways, and everybody knows it. But I do know that my public school friends were still taking those same tests. And I think that's kind of what I think there is a small amount. I don't know if I would characterize it as small, but there is an amount of oversight just to make sure that your kids are actually making progress in one way or another.
Sure. So there's like a standardized testing, or at least a benchmarker to find out if the kids are learning the right math, or at least a level of math or whatever.
And so, whether that's managed by one of those companies or the state itself, I'm not sure. I imagine that those companies sort of do a lot of that for you, or provide the resources.
Because when I was growing up, when I heard homeschool, I thought, I didn't realize that there was any kind of organization attached. I thought it was just parents got to figure out what they taught their kids.
Yeah.
And my thought was always like, wow, they must be rich or something to stay home and teach their
rich or brilliant or geniuses. Or brilliant.
Yeah. So when it comes to that, in terms of breaking off the public school system is one thing. The ideologies and worldviews that can be placed in some kind of homeschool system moving forward, maybe not immediately, but kind of creeping in over time.
You mean through
that would be interesting?
You mean like a homogenized, making it through provided curriculums or something?
Yeah, because like even for me, when my oldest daughter, she went to like a private Christian school, but over time I noticed, and I wasn't like super involved with all the educational side of things with her. I was, I'm the stepdad, so I was kind of oblivious to a lot of what was going on there.
Yeah.
But I do recall over time, and this is California, so it's probably different in other states and other places, but over time, even the Christian private school, the curriculum, the standardized testing, everything became the same as public school. I mean, it was literally like, oh, wow, why are we even going to a private Christian school? The only difference is they get a sermon during the middle of the week or something. Otherwise, it's kind of the same thing.
Right.
Socially, it's the same or similar. In terms of curriculum, it's not that much different. I mean, I guess you can say, you can say that the teachers are Christians or whatever, but that's not always it's a peace of mind. It's supposed to be a peace of mind, but it doesn't always work out that way. People just have problems. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you're like a great teacher or a great person.
Oh, I did go to Christian school for a very short amount of time. So it was no better of an experience to go into public school, honestly.
So I think this is good in a sense, but also it's interesting as to how it affects in general the family infrastructure, especially with like minorities and like the lower class, where they're I guess financially they're more than likely they're either single home or single parent homes, or both parents are working. So when it comes to and there are other, I guess, formats of homeschooling too, where it's like, okay, if there is a parent that can kind of do a quote unquote daycare type of thing.
Yeah. Well, I do know that does happen.
I know. That's what I'm saying.
Homeschoolers will team together and kind of switch responsibilities.
So you have a social experience with your local community and stuff like that. So there's no fast rule. I'm just wondering, when it comes to the state and the government validating the education, that's where I think no matter what, they're going to be able to sort of set the standard regardless of whether you're homeschooled or public schooled or whatever.
Oh, yeah, with the standardized tests. Now, with those standardized tests, if I remember correctly, they were more like mechanical than ideological. You know, you got your math section,